They are so difficult to save that the question of their salvation, as far as man is concerned, constantly hangs in the balance. And indeed, if any part of the work of sanctification were laid upon us as our responsibility, we would be lost forever and ever. I know with absolute certainty, beyond any contradiction, that would be the case with me if sanctification were not the work of God. That doesn't mean that sanctification is 90% God's work and 10% our work. It doesn't mean even that it's 99.9% God's work and 0.1% our work. It's all God's work. We are His sons and daughters. We are taken into His covenant. He dwells with us. He is our God. We are His people, His holy people. We all confess that. I believe in Holy Catholic Church. Holy Catholic Church. Why then the admonition? And that's the question which you and I consider this morning as we consider this text. Why the admonition? That's such a miraculous thing that we can still be admonished in all seriousness to obey this calling that the canons of Dort, when they are discussing this great wonder, talk about it in terms that leave one with the impression they cannot find words adequate to describe what an amazing, miraculous, wonderful work that is, where God is the sole author of our sanctification, and we admonished to cleanse ourselves. They talk about that work of God as being greater in some respects even than the creation of the world. It's harder for God to make a saint out of you and me than it was for Him when He called the worlds into existence. At least when He called the worlds into existence, there wasn't anything there, and He called things into being that were not as though they were. But with us, He's got to deal with dreadfully, unbelievably sinful people. And, say the canons, that vies for excellency with the work of creation. The canons, reaching out to find words that properly describe it, talk about it as being irresistible, as being beyond understanding, as being impossible to describe. Ineffable, I think, is the word they use there. Impossible to put into words. It's a miracle that defies the imagination. But I want to consider that miracle of this admonition with you this morning. You may ask yourself the question, I think, maybe we ought to consider that at the very outset. Why does God, who Himself is the author and finisher of our faith, who is alone the sanctifier, so earnestly admonish us to cleanse ourselves? Why does He do that? Well, the answer to that question is simply this, beloved. He doesn't treat us as a baby doll. He doesn't set up inanimate dolls, female and male dolls, that are dirty and have been dug out of the bottom of a manure pile and clean them so that the dolls are unaware of what is happening. He deals with us in such a way, and that's the wonder of the miracle too, that we experience fully His work of sanctification. He wants us and sees to us sees to it that we see what is happening and see what a great work of God this is, that we are sanctified and yet are called to be His people. He works the wonder of sanctification in us by admonitions, serious admonitions, admonitions which we ignore to our peril, admonitions with which we must contend at the peril of becoming antinomian in our thinking. So let's consider that together this morning. The admonition is to cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit. It's a very deliberate way that the apostle uses here to express the work of sanctification, and I really don't know of a better way to make what the apostle has in mind here clear without very briefly calling your attention to the wonder of man's creation in paradise as described in Genesis 2:7. The word flesh in Scripture, while it has several meanings, most frequently means our entire natures from the viewpoint of our total depravity. Sometimes Scriptures use the word flesh to point out the fleetingness of life, the frailty of human existence. All flesh is as grass. But more often it speaks of flesh from the viewpoint of its inherent corruption that embraces the whole of the nature. God created man, body and soul. And when He created man as body and soul, those constituted, after he fell, his flesh. He's a man of body and soul. And when the apostle speaks of flesh, therefore, he's not referring simply to our bodies, but to our entire natures that have been corrupted and depraved because of Adam's fall. Nevertheless, when He created man with a soul, He created man as a marvelous creature, so that man's soul has two sides to it, if I may put it that way. It has a side to his soul that puts him in contact with God's creation and is a perpetual reminder to man that he is a part of God's world. From dust thou wert taken, unto dust thou shalt return. God created man in the organic unity of the world of trees and flowers and animals and stars. Man is a part of that. That he has a soul. That one side of the soul means that man stands related to this earthly creation. He can study it. He can see it. He can work with it. He can keep the garden. Adam could keep the garden. He could gaze at the starry heavens. He could appreciate the beauty of the flowers. He could name the animals. He lived as a part of this earthly creation, and he lived in harmony with it and dependent upon it, inescapably dependent upon it, so that his life was entirely intertwined with the life of this material earthly creation. On the other hand, the other side of his soul was his spirit. And his spirit made him a creature who could, in a unique way, live in fellowship with God.